The final section in Chapter 7 is called Debating the Constitution. As I said at the end of the Section 2 video, the Constitution is written, the delegates agree on it, but it hasn't been ratified, which means the states have not agreed to adopt it, have not agreed to abide by its rules. Once it's written, the states have to have a convention, and the Constitution goes into effect once 9 states ratify this Constitution. So here are our key terms. Old Alexander Hamilton comes back. As we're debating the new Constitution, 2 sides take shape. One side is the Federalists. These are represented by Alexander Hamilton. He is noted with saying Constitution should consist only of general provisions. The reason is that they must necessarily be permanent and that they cannot calculate for the possible change of things. Basically, constitutions have to be vague because time changes, people change. Things that are acceptable at one point are not acceptable later. And any kind of constitution that you write is not going to be able to anticipate these changes. So it has to be something that can be interpreted, it can be used as more of a guide than a step-by-step instruction. On the other hand, with the anti-federalists, so the ones who did not like the Constitution so much, Thomas Jefferson was definitely an anti-federalist. There are several others. Patrick Henry, the one who said, "Give me liberty or give me death," he was an anti-federalist. But in a letter to James Madison, Thomas Jefferson said, "A Bill of Rights is what the people are entitled to against every government on earth, general or particular, and what no just government should refuse or rest on inference." So the Constitution did not have the Bill of Rights at first. It skips the it skips all the amendments because they don't have any yet. Again, to ratify the Constitution, each state had to hold a convention. Once 9 states had ratified it, then this Constitution would go into effect and the rules that it put in place would be valid. Supporters of the new Constitution called themselves Federalists because they wanted a strong federal government. James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay are some of the most famous ones. And they're the writers of something called the Federalist Papers. These are 85 essays that were published in newspapers to support the ratification of the Constitution. The Federalist position was that we had to have a stronger central government. The national government has to have powers that were denied to it under the Articles of Confederation, including the powers to enforce laws. However, on the other hand, we have anti-federalists. I remembered to click to the next slide this time. I'm getting so good at this. Anti-federalists were led by a man named George Mason from Virginia. He is the one who wrote Virginia's Bill of Rights way back in the day. Well, not really that long ago, but still. Patrick Henry was also a very well-known anti-federalist, as I said before. And while they agreed that the Articles of Confederation were not strong enough, they thought that the Constitutional Convention had overstepped. They had gone too far. Anti-federalists, as they are just generally, were much less organized than the Federalists. That kind of goes back to their whole way of thinking, honestly. But some of the most frequent arguments included the fact that the Constitution weakens state governments. Too strong of a central government would wipe out state power and individual freedom. It sounded way too much like Britain to them, and they said, "Wait, hold on, back up." You also had many anti-federalists who were pointing out that the Constitution offers zero protections for basic freedoms. Unlike our state constitutions, it had no Bill of Rights. Another is there's no limit on how many times a president could be reelected. So it had the every 4 years in there, but it didn't have a limit. And Patrick Henry said, you could just keep electing the same person over and over and over. Why? This is no different than a king. This is a king with a different name. As the states held their ratification conventions, these debates between Federalists and Anti-Federalists get more heated. Because remember, without the approval of 9 states, the Constitution does not go into effect. Delaware, lovely Delaware, unanimously approves the Constitution on December 7th, 1787. That's why it's known as the first state. Delaware first one. It was followed by Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Georgia, and Connecticut soon after. So we are at a grand count of 5. 5 states have ratified. Anti-Federalists are thinking they can get some support in Massachusetts. Opposition to the Constitution was pretty strong in these rural areas because remember, Massachusetts is where you had Shays' Rebellion. So they're very skeptical of any kind of federal anything. There was a concerted effort by Federalists in Massachusetts to campaign for the Constitution. So luckily, this paid off and Massachusetts ratified. After that, everybody is looking at Virginia. Not like literally, they weren't just like, hey, Virginia. But, figuratively. At this point, Maryland and South Carolina have ratified, which we have 8 states. Only 1 more is needed. But we don't have New York and we don't have Virginia. Virginia is got a large population, got influential people from there. And whatever they do is going to influence the ones who have not yet done so, who have not yet ratified it. When Massachusetts ratified the Constitution, it sent Congress a long list of amendments, like things they needed to change. Patrick Henry leads the attack on the Constitution in Virginia. He was probably one of the most famous anti-federalists from that state. He says that there is no checks and balances. There's nothing to limit power in this government. James Madison, who was originally a Federalist, said, look, if we do not adopt this, the Union is going to break apart, and everything that we fought for is just completely gone. In the end, Virginia ratifies by a very narrow margin, and only after James Madison promises their ratification convention that a Bill of Rights would be added quickly after ratification. New York ratified, but also like Massachusetts, they sent a list of amendments. And Rhode Island and North Carolina both 100% refused to ratify it without a Bill of Rights. In June of 1788, this is while Virginia was still arguing on whether or not they should ratify, New Hampshire became the 9th state to ratify the Constitution. So now it goes into effect. And that's great that now it's ratified and it goes into effect. But, the states that haven't adopted it, it's not like they're going to say, oh, yes, well, let's start operating under this. New York and North Carolina, like I said, they eventually followed. North Carolina not without a Bill of Rights. And in May of 1790, Rhode Island becomes the last of the original 13 states to ratify the Constitution. So again, that's in 1790. Once we have our 9 states that ratify the Constitution, we have to set up a government. It doesn't exist. We have to start from scratch. George Washington was elected unanimously as the first president, and John Adams from Massachusetts becomes the vice president. During these debates on ratification, many of the states said, we need a Bill of Rights. So let's get our little democracy-loving selves down to the State House and let's start amending that thing. When the new Congress meets in March of 1789, that's exactly what they did. They start drawing out the amendments, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. I see what I'm asking. Okay, so yeah, the first 10 amendments are called the Bill of Rights, and they're necessary, number one, to get some of these states to get on board with ratification, and also to actually spell out in plain language what rights are protected by this document. Wait a minute. Do I want you to know this? Yes, okay. Like I said, the Bill of Rights is there to protect people against abuses by the federal government. Our First Amendment guarantees the freedom of religion, speech, and the press. The second has the right to bear arms, so government can't take your guns. The third keeps Congress from forcing citizens to keep troops in their homes. These first three amendments are 100% drawn back to the abuses practiced by the British government in the colonies before the Revolution. The Fourth Amendment protects the citizens from unreasonable searches of their homes or seizures of their property. Amendments 5 through 8 protect citizens who are accused of crimes and are brought to trial. And the last two, so 9 and 10, limit the powers of the federal government to those that are granted in the Constitution. You also have the thing called the implied powers, but I believe we talk more about that in chapter 8, so I am not going to focus on that right now. Also do the day of the test.